Episode 38. Harry's heart turned over. His mother and father were beaming up at him, sitting on either side of a small, watery-eyed man Harry recognized at once as Wormtail. He was the one who had betrayed their whereabouts to Voldemort and so helped bring about their deaths. Said Moody. Harry looked up into Moody's heavily scarred and pitted face. Evidently, Moody was under the impression he had just given Harry a bit of a treat. Yeah, said Harry, attempting to grin again. Listen, I've just remembered I haven't packed my... He was spared the trouble of inventing an object he had not packed. Sirius had just said, "What's that you've got there, Mad-Eye?" And Moody had turned toward him. Harry crossed the kitchen, slipped through the door and up the stairs before anyone could call him back. He did not know why he had received such a shock. He'd seen his parents' pictures before, after all, and he had met Wormtail. But to have them sprung on him like that when he was least expecting it, no one would like that, he thought angrily. And then to see them surrounded by all those other happy faces, Benji Fenwick, who had been found in bits, and Gideon Pruitt, who had died like a hero, and the Longbottoms, who had been tortured into madness, all waving happily out of the photograph forevermore, not knowing that they were doomed. Well, Moody might find that interesting. He, Harry, found it disturbing. Harry tiptoed up the stairs in the hall, past the stuffed elf heads, glad to be on his own again. But as he approached the first landing, he heard noises. Somebody was sobbing in the drawing room. "Hello?" Harry said. There was no answer, but the sobbing continued. He climbed the remaining stairs 2 at a time, walked across the landing, and opened the drawing room door. Someone was cowering against the dark wall, her wand in her hand, her whole body shaking with sobs. Sprawled on the dusty old carpet in a patch of moonlight, clearly dead, was Ron. All the air seemed to vanish from Harry's lungs. He felt as though he were falling through the floor. His brain turned icy cold. Ron dead? No, he couldn't be. But wait a moment. It couldn't be. Ron was downstairs. "Mrs. Weasley?" Harry croaked. "Ridiculous!" Mrs. Weasley sobbed, pointing her shaking wand at Ron's body. Ron's body turned into Bill's, spread-eagled on his back, his eyes wide open and empty. Mrs. Weasley sobbed harder than ever. "Ridiculous!" she sobbed again. Mr. Weasley's body replaced Bill's, his glasses askew, a trickle of blood running down his face. "No!" Mrs. Weasley moaned. "No! Ridiculous! Ridiculous! Ridiculous!" Dead twins. Dead Percy. Dead Harry. "Mrs. Weasley, get out of here!" shouted Harry, staring down at his own dead body on the floor. "Let someone else." "What's going on?" Lupin had come running into the room, closely followed by Sirius, with Moody stumping along behind them. Lupin looked from Mrs. Weasley to the dead Harry on the floor and seemed to understand in an instant. Pulling out his own wand, he said very firmly and clearly, "Ridiculous!" Harry's body vanished. A silvery orb hung in the air over the spot where it had lain. Lupin waved his wand once more, and the orb vanished in a puff of smoke. "Oh, gulped Mrs. Weasley, and she broke into a storm of crying, her face in her hands. "Molly," said Lupin bleakly, walking over to her. "Molly, don't." Next second she was sobbing her heart out on Lupin's shoulder. "Molly, it's just a boggart," he said soothingly, patting her on the head. "Just a stupid boggart."
"I see them dead all the time,"
Mrs. Weasley moaned into his shoulder.
"All the time. I dream about it."
Sirius was staring at the patch of carpet where the boggart, pretending to be Harry's body, had laid. Moody was looking at Harry, who avoided his gaze. He had a funny feeling Moody's magical eye had followed him all the way out of the kitchen.
"Don't tell Arthur."
Mrs. Weasley was gulping now, mopping her eyes frantically with her cuffs.
"I don't want him to know. I'm being silly."
Lupin handed her a handkerchief, and she blew her nose.
"Harry, I'm so sorry. What must you think of me?" she said shakily. "Not even able to get rid of a boggart."
"Don't be stupid," said Harry, trying to smile.
"I'm just so worried," she said,
tears spilling out of her eyes again.
"Half the family's in the order. It'll be a miracle if we all come through this. And Percy's not talking to us. What if something dreadful happens and we've never made up? And what's going to happen if Arthur and I get killed? Who's going to look after Ron and Ginny?"
"Molly, that's enough," said Lupin firmly. "This isn't like last time. The Order is better prepared. We've got a head start. We know what Voldemort's up to." Mrs. Weasley gave a little squeak of fright at the sound of the name. "Oh, Molly, come on. It's about time you got used to hearing it. Look, I can't promise no one's going to get hurt. Nobody can promise that. But we're much better off than we were last time. You weren't in the Order then. You don't understand. Last time we were outnumbered 20-1 by the Death Eaters, and they were picking us off one by one." Harry thought of the photograph again, of his parents' beaming faces. He knew Moody was still watching him. "Don't worry about Percy," said Sirius abruptly. "He'll come round. It's a matter of time before Voldemort moves into the open. Once he does, the whole ministry's going to be begging us to forgive them. And I'm not sure I'll be accepting their apology," he added bitterly. "And as for who's going to look after Ron and Ginny if you and Arthur died," said Lupin, smiling slightly, "what do you think we'd do, let them starve?" Mrs. Weasley smiled tremulously. "Being silly," she muttered again, mopping her eyes. But Harry, closing his bedroom door behind him some 10 minutes later, could not think Mrs. Weasley silly. He could still see his parents beaming up at him from the tattered old photograph, unaware that their lives, like so many of those around them, were drawing to a close. The image of the boggart posing as the corpse of each member of Mrs. Weasley's family in turn kept flashing before his eyes. Without warning, the scar on his forehead seared with pain again, and his stomach churned horribly. "Cut it out," he said firmly, rubbing the scar as the pain receded again. "First sign of madness, talking to your own head," said a sly voice from the empty picture on the wall. Harry ignored it. He felt older than he had ever felt in his life, and it seemed extraordinary to him that barely an hour ago he had been worried about a joke shop and who had gotten a prefect's badge. Chapter 10. Luna Lovegood. Harry had a troubled night's sleep. His parents wove in and out of his dreams, never speaking. Mrs. Weasley sobbed over Creature's dead body, watched by Ron and Hermione, who were wearing crowns. And yet again, Harry found himself walking down a corridor ending in a locked door. He awoke abruptly with his scar prickling to find Ron already dressed and talking to him. "Better hurry up. Mom's going ballistic." She says we're going to miss the train.